The NCAA formed in 1910. The purpose was to protect young collegiate athletes, student athletes, from some of the dangerous and exploitative athletic practices that was going on in the early 1900s and the late 1800s, as well as to provide regulations and rules to sports and athletic competitions that were um, competed in by athletes on the collegiate level. As far as the modern era, doping dates back to the early 1900s. It began with horse racing, actually, and then the first recorded case of an athlete using performance-enhancing drugs was in the 1904 Olympics. Drug testing for the NCAA began in 1986 and was fully regulated for year-round testing in 1990. Now, currently, we're up to about 90% of Division I schools conducting their own drug testing program that is in addition to the drug testing program that is conducted by the NCAA. The core purposes and values of the NCAA include high levels of integrity as well as sportsmanship, making sure that you're doing things honestly, as well as not cheating the game, not cheating your teammates, not cheating your coaches and your opponents, pursuing excellence and greatness in the classroom as well as in the athletic arena, and to allow equal participation and equal opportunity for not just athletes but coaches as well. And in addition to these core values, there are 9 types of drugs banned by the NCAA. Some of these include stimulants, beta blockers, as well as human growth hormones. Here are a few reasons why athletes should be tested. First off, drugs are often used as a coping mechanism for athletes. In the next 3 points below, you can see in the next 3 bullet points below, you can see the data supporting athletes abusing alcohol, which also indicates that they may be also abusing drugs and may not be putting themselves in the best position to perform athletically. And the last reason why we want to test athletes as a deterrent, we want to make sure that we're being proactive to a situation and not being reactive. We want to be less responsive and get ahead of the situation rather than allowing situations to occur and then addressing them as they're occurring. In other words, we want to nip it in the bud.
All right, so as to why student athletes should not be drug tested, I think there are 2 main issues. And I think it's also worth noting that this debate we're having about the ethicality of drug testing, it's even bigger than that. It's a legal issue. So there are numerous court cases involving parents and families or student athletes challenging the drug testing policies of their institution, feeling that it's unconstitutional. And that's something, like I said, that's constantly being challenged. There are so many notable lawsuits in terms of drug testing policies. A lot of times the results have varied, mostly because the different states have different constitutions. So some states find it constitutional, some don't. But like I said, this is a legal issue, so we know there's definitely something going on here that's not right. So like I said, people feel as if it is people are challenging the constitutionality of it. They feel like it's a violation of their rights. So under the Constitution, under the Fourth Amendment, we are granted protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. So basically anything that we shouldn't be forced to just have to be searched and waive our rights like that. So that's why we have the Constitution. That's why we have these amendments in place to protect us. But what is happening here is the student athletes' rights are being violated. So I think kind of another key thing is the Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches. So many times the drug testing is occurring suspicionless. So there's no, probable cause as to why the student athlete needs to be drug tested. It's just unreasonable and unnecessary because it's suspicionless, and that's the violation right there. We're protected against that, and this is just not, we're not upholding the protection for these student athletes. And then kind of another big thing is that every institution is allowed to have their own drug testing policy. So there's not one consistent policy that all schools follow, and there's not, certain guidelines for the consequences. So that's really where this becomes an issue of, it's unfair. It's giving some schools an unfair advantage because schools have the ability to create their own policy and consequences. So some schools are able to, some schools pick more lenient policies. A study was done and it showed that the consequences were definitely more lenient for Division I schools versus Divisions 2 and 3, and that kind of fits with that, that message we have that, okay, Division I is all about making profit, and then as you go down the divisions, it's less about the athletics and more about the academics too. So I think a really great example of this was during the 2015 Final Four in college basketball. So the 4 teams, they all had different policies. So one school had 1 year suspension, one school had half the season suspension, one school had 10% of the season suspension, and then one school had suspension for a year. And these were all for Division I universities, major universities, and they were all there competing, and they had all these different policies. So there could have been someone on one team who failed a drug test but was only suspended for 10% of the games, so he's able to play, whereas a player on the other team that was suspended had for the same reason ends up getting half the year and they're not able to play. So that really could change the outcome of the game. So it's just really giving schools the ability to make their own rules. And then, of course, they're going to make the rules more lenient to ensure that their student athletes are eligible. And this is kind of another way that it shows that this policy is not for the safety of students, it's for the NCAA. So, and each individual institution. So they care more about wins and athletics than academics, or even more importantly, student athlete well-being. So that's kind of the idea of, they're protecting the student athletes' well-being. With this policy, they're keeping them safe, they're keeping them healthy. But if that was really the case, then they would have consistent policies that would be properly enforced, and that would really help student athletes and try to kind of show and put their health and well-being first. But that's clearly not what's going on here.
I believe that Carly made valid points, but I also believe that there are more reasons as to why athletes should be tested rather than why they shouldn't be tested. And The next reason is that athletes are now allowed to receive payments for the use of their name, image, and likenesses. So if athletes are to have a video shoot or have a photo shoot for a magazine cover or any type of sports blog or web page, then that athlete may receive payment for the use of that image, for the use of their name, and for the use of course, their likeness. The trend has already started with California and Florida, and I believe that trend will continue shortly in the future. We didn't think that we would see this happen so shortly, but now we're starting to see the ball get rolling as far as athletes receiving payment for that. And I believe that it will continue, and we'll see more of that in the near future. The second reason why is that most athletes or student athletes already waive most of their rights, if not all of their rights, being on the athletic team. They remove their rights to stay out past certain times. They don't have the right to have jobs unless it's approved by a coach, and that's only during the summer season, in which case most of these athletes are back home, or some may have summer workouts that they may attend. But other than that, those athletes aren't there during the time where they need the money the most, which is during the fall and the spring. However, they do receive an athletic scholarship, and an athletic scholarship, if it is a full scholarship, covers their room and board. It covers their meal plans that they use to pay for food, as well as additional money that they may use for food purposes. And the last, and what I believe the most important reason why, is that it allows coaches, it allows mentors, and it allows psychologists, team psychologists, to address opportunities of potential issues. And what I mean by potential issues are lifelong issues. Issues such as a story such as Josh Gordon, where for most of his life he's been on drugs, and that was just the case of his home environment. Nobody caught on to that. Nobody addressed that issue. Of course, he was caught with the drug violations while he was in college, and as well as while he's been in the NFL. But all of the measures in response to that have been punitive rather than rehabilitating. I believe if they try to rehabilitate him, an athlete, rather than punishing an athlete, getting ahead of the problem, being able to address the issue rather than catching it when the NCAA gets a hold of it, then I think the problem would be much easier resolved, and that athlete would have a much better chance of not violating that rule in the future.
And well, to that, I would again say, so if these drug tests were really for the benefit and the safety and the well-being of the student athlete, then they would have consequences that are not punitive measures, but rather kind of help and treatment. So with all these policies, there's plenty of suspensions, probation, the type of things where you're just simply being punished. Few policies actually outline specific counseling requirements. So they may allude to it, but they don't actually have a plan for it. They kind of leave that up to the student athlete and to kind of assume they're getting help. And really all they're interested in is the punishment part. And in that area, you can kind of see the discrepancy, like I said, between, okay, if they were really interested in the well-being of the student athlete, they would want them to go to counseling, want them to go to treatment, want them to go to educational classes, want them to get better. But in this case, they just want to kind of punish them and move on. So that's kind of the quicker thing to do. It's quicker, easier for them to just, suspend a player rather than, okay, taking the time to sit down and figure out what is it that's going on? Do they need help? Is this something serious? Is it, recurring? That kind of thing. So I think that also kind of leads into my next kind of, what I would say to that is that, yes, there are going to be positive tests with college students. So I think that, a test could come back positive for a student maybe who has engaged in some type of drugs or alcohol. So the test obviously comes back positive, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's a drug or an alcohol problem. So universities are kind of just making that assumption that, okay, a positive test equals this student has a drug and alcohol problem, so we have a problem. So that's kind of the whole point of the test, is that it is a way to protect the student athletes. Again, as I've said, protecting the student athletes, and for the good of people's well-being. But if that was the case, then we wouldn't have this problem. So, they may say, okay, there's a drug problem because there's some positive tests. So they're spending all this money on drug testing and additional services then as a result of the consequences. So whether it's treatment, educational services, those kind of things, when they bring in, the people to meet with the teams. So you're kind of spending all that money and devoting all those resources to, something that you don't really need to be doing. You're not, like I said before, you're not taking the time to sit down with the student athlete and figure out what's going on. You're just kind of jumping to conclusions. And that again shows that they're really not in this for the student athlete's safety, well-being. They're not doing this for the student athlete, and their actions have made that very clear.